Admiral Gortney, it was great seeing you in Alaska recently. I wanted to dig into a little bit more on the Arctic strategy that's highlighted in your testimony, and I actually really appreciate how much emphasis you've been given that in your new position and in your testimony. You know, one of the things that I think has come up in a lot of the hearings here, whether it's General Dempsey or the Secretary Carter's growing importance, but also kind of the fluidity of what's going on in the Arctic, particularly with regard to the Russian moves that I know you've been keeping an eye on. As a matter of fact, your testimony mentions the aggressiveness that we haven't seen since the Cold War in terms of the bomber runs. As you know, they're building new airfields in the Arctic. They have a new Arctic command. General Dempsey testified last week. 4 new Arctic combat brigades being deployed by the Russians in the Arctic. A huge icebreaker fleet with as many as 11 more new icebreakers. So they're clearly seen as a strategic area for the world, resource development, new sea lanes that are developing there. And my concern is that we're well behind the Russians in terms of this, not only as an opportunity, but also as a growing area of military competition that they're clearly making it out to be. I'll give you a few examples on that. You know, our Army is looking at reducing, in the light of what the Russians are doing, reducing 2 combat brigades based in Alaska. That's a big concern. I just have a couple questions that they're all kind of related, so I'll just pose them to you. Do we have an Arctic O plan right now, and how would the Army troops in the Arctic, in Alaska, fit into that, and does it make sense to significantly reduce our military presence in the Arctic before we even put out an O plan, and in the face of what clearly is a Russian dramatic increase in the militarization of the Arctic? You know, General Odierno mentioned yesterday in testimony before the Appropriations Committee that he was waiting on Northcom's Arctic strategy to kind of get a sense of what they're going to do with troop levels. So you talk about seams. As you and I have discussed, Alaska is really at the seams of Northcom, PACOM, EUCOM, and sometimes that's helpful. Other times I think we can have our strategy fall through the seams. Can you just comment on that, please?
Yes, I'm assigned to be the advocate of the Arctic, which is not a doctrinal term. It's not. I can't direct anybody to do anything, but we are working on answering that question. What are the requirements that we're going to need to be able to inform our own operational plans, as you mentioned, on the future of the Arctic, and then what we feel are recommendations for all of DoD, not just the services, for what necessary investments that get up there.
Great, because, you know, another thing that kind of it looks like it's falling through the seams, at least within DOD and outside the DOD, is icebreakers. When the CNO was here last week, talked about the importance of those. Everybody agrees they're important, and yet the Navy's not in charge of those. It's the Coast Guard. So there doesn't seem to be a coordinated focus on that as well. Which
goes to the impact of our interagency relationships and the impact of sequestration. The Coast Guard is responsible for the icebreakers. We don't, as CNO said, we don't have any ships up there, but that float on top of the ocean. But we have submarines up there quite frequently. But we need to figure out what are the capabilities that we need, because it's a very harsh place. I mean, I love visiting your state, but it's a hard place. It's a hard place to live and operate, and we have the difficulty. We have the inability right now to reliably navigate, communicate, and then sustain ourselves as we're up there. So that's what we're trying to answer. Well, we will endeavor to answer as the advocate, and that report will be due out this spring, sir.
Great, thank you. And I do think the hardness actually makes for great training, whether it's the Marines or the Army or the Navy, Air Force out there.